She handed him bread. Hours later, the Marines stormed the cafe. That's the line witnesses remembered. Royal Marines, in full dress blues, walked into a quiet London bakery like it was a war zone. They didn't want croissants. They wanted answers. Mob investigators locked down the shop. The owner was cornered, fined, shamed, his business sealed shut by sunset. And at the center of it all was a 13-year-old girl named Lena, and a soldier who refused to look the other way. But how did it come to this? Let's rewind. It started with fog. Cold, heavy London fog that soaked through every layer. Sergeant Callum Rourke, silent and disciplined, stepped out of it wearing a red uniform tourists loved to photograph. He looked like tradition. But behind the bearskin hat was a man who had survived war zones, carried bleeding comrades across sand, and learned long ago how to spot danger in plain sight. He wasn't expecting kindness that day, especially not from a girl hiding behind an oversized apron in a crumbling bakery. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what he wanted. She simply gave a cup of hot water. And then, with the gentlest lie imaginable, a small loaf of bread. "You drop this," she said, knowing full well he hadn't. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. And it cost her everything, because minutes later, her boss Victor Mays erupted from the back like a storm of vinegar and rage. He screamed, humiliated her, fired her on the spot, threw her out onto the street with no money, no contract, no rights. But Victor had made one mistake. He'd done it in view of Callum Rourke, and Callum wasn't just standing still. He was watching, thinking, deciding, because when someone who's trained to save lives sees injustice this close to home, you can bet something's about to happen. He called a fellow soldier. They called Mod Civil Enforcement. And hours later, Victor's quiet bakery became a scene from a courtroom. Charges, fines, cameras, witnesses, and Lena, she came back. Not to work, but to collect her back wages, sign legal protection papers, and walk out with her head held higher than ever before. Callum didn't say a word. He could not while on duty. But when Lena spotted him in the crowd, she raised her hand in the smallest, bravest wave. He didn't move. But somehow, everyone watching knew he'd seen her, and that he'd never let her be invisible again. So I'll ask you now, would you have noticed her? Would you have walked past the kindness? Or the cruelty? Or would you, like him, have stood still until it was time to move? Welcome to Tales and Truths, where the quietest moments hold the loudest meaning. Here, we tell stories that start small. A loaf of bread, a single nod, but unravel into something far greater. Like the day a silent soldier accepted a gift from a young girl, and hours later, Royal Marines stormed a bakery in the name of justice. These aren't just tales. They're truths of courage, quiet strength, and the power of noticing what others ignore. If you believe kindness matters, if you've ever seen something wrong and wondered whether to act, you're in the right place. Every episode, we reveal how small acts ripple into life-changing moments. So stay a while, subscribe, and ask yourself, what would you have done? This is Tales and Truths. The fog had rolled in thick that November morning, swallowing the London streets in a cold, wet silence. The kind of silence that seeped through your coat and settled in your bones. Sergeant Callum Rourke emerged from the mist like a figure carved out of the past, stoic, upright, his red ceremonial uniform catching what little light filtered through the clouded sky. To the tourists clustering outside St. James Palace, he was a royal relic, part of the ancient machine of monarchy. But beneath the tall bearskin hat and polished boots was a man who had once moved silently through enemy territory, who'd carried wounded friends through sandstorms, who had learned long ago that seeing things others ignored could save lives. Callum's shift allowed a brief moment for hydration, an unspoken pause in the rigid rhythm of ceremonial duty. He turned off the main road and ducked into a small, Crumbling bakery tucked between a souvenir shop and a shuttered pub. The paint on the door was chipped, the sign hanging askew, and the bell above the entrance gave a tired clang as he stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a girl, no older than 13, with dark hair tied into a loose ponytail, and eyes that had seen more than they should have. Her apron nearly swallowed her, and her hands moved with the quiet urgency of someone who understood that staying busy meant staying safe. She looked up the moment Callum entered. She didn't flinch or smile or ask what he needed. Instead, she reached for a paper cup, filled it with steaming water, just water, and placed it gently on the counter in front of him. No charge, no small talk. Just a quiet act of kindness. Then just as he turned to leave, she reached beneath the counter and placed a small, wrapped loaf of bread beside the register. "You dropped this," she said softly. Callum paused. He knew. He hadn't dropped anything. She knew it too. But it was her way of helping without making it a transaction. A lie told with compassion is something else entirely, something more honest than the truth. He looked at her for a long moment, not at the bread, but at the intention behind it. The unspoken recognition of fatigue, of hunger, of standing still in the cold for hours on end. He nodded once, just once, took the bread, said nothing, and stepped out into the mist again. Behind him, the bell above the door chimed faintly. Then, from the back of the bakery, a voice erupted like gravel down a chalkboard. "Lena, what did I tell you about freebies?" Callum kept walking, though the sound stayed with him like a stone in his boot. He'd seen that look before, in villages. Turned to rubble, in refugee camps lined with hopeless eyes. That quiet, resigned expression children wore when adults forgot they were supposed to be protectors, not prison guards. He'd walked into the bakery for a cup of water, but he'd left with something far heavier, a glimpse into a world most people don't see unless they choose to. And Callum Rourke had spent too long in silence, watching from the sidelines, pretending that duty and decency were always the same thing. As he melted back into the fog and took his place beside the palace gates, he didn't know yet what he would do. He only knew one thing for certain. That girl had seen him, not just the uniform, but the man beneath it. And now he'd seen her too. And once you see something that's wrong, really see it, you can't unsee it. Not if you're the kind of person who spent his life standing between the world and what it's afraid to face. The bell above the bakery door hadn't even stopped ringing before Victor Mays came storming out from the back, his voice cutting through the stale air like a blade. "Lena, what did I just say about giving things away for free?" Lena froze. The rag in her hand dropped to the counter. Her shoulders didn't flinch. She had long since learned to keep them still, to brace for verbal blows the way others brace for wind in a storm. She didn't meet his eyes. "It was just a piece of bread," she said softly, barely more than a whisper. He looked like he hadn't eaten. Victor laughed, sharp and humorless. "He's a soldier, not some homeless stray. And this isn't a charity. You don't get to decide what leaves this counter without payment. I do. Me. You got that?" She nodded slowly, eyes cast down at her shoes. But that wasn't enough for him. Victor stepped closer, his presence looming, his breath sour with cigarettes and something bitterer resentment maybe. "That uniform out there? It's a costume, Lena. He's not some hero. He's a mannequin with a hat, and now you've cost me money. You know what that makes you?" Lena didn't answer. He slammed his palm against the counter. She jumped, instinctively pulling back. A few customers turned their heads, quieting their conversations, pretending not to eavesdrop while clearly listening to every word. "That makes you a liability," Victor sneered. "Someone who doesn't know her place. You think kindness keeps the lights on? That smile of yours gonna pay the gas bill?" She still said nothing. Still didn't look up. Victor straightened, shaking his head. "I should have known. Took you in out of pity. Gave you a chance when no one else would. And this is what I get." He waved his hand toward the door, toward the space where Callum Rourke had stood just minutes before. "Well, congratulations. You're done here." She blinked. "Sir, you're fired," he spat. "Pack up your stuff. And don't expect a penny. You're not even supposed to be working here. No papers, no contract. As far as I'm concerned, you were never here." Lena stood frozen, her small hands clenched tight around the edges of her apron. Her voice, when it came, was flat. "Hello. Okay." Victor seemed almost disappointed by the lack of reaction. "That's it? No tears? No begging? You kids are all the same. Think the world owes you something just because you're breathing." She untied the apron slowly, folded it with care, and placed it on the counter. From outside, Sergeant Rourke stood beneath the veil of fog, watching the scene unfold through the frosted window. He saw her figure disappear toward the back, heard the muffled yelling echo from the alley. His fists clenched. "Not yet," he told himself. "Not like this." Minutes later, Lena emerged from the rear door, carrying a plastic grocery bag and her school backpack. Victor was still shouting, still puffed up with self-importance. "You walk out that door, and you're nothing," he roared. "Nobody's gonna believe you over me. I'm a business owner. You're a kid. You'll be forgotten in a week." She handed him a ring of keys. No words, no anger. Just silence. And Victor hated the silence, because silence meant dignity. It meant she hadn't given him the satisfaction. As Lena disappeared into the flow of pedestrians outside, Callum turned away. His training had taught him to wait for the right moment, but this wasn't something he could ignore. The girl had given bread. The man had given bile, and someone was going to answer for that. The streets were buzzing with late morning foot. Traffic tourists fumbling with maps, office workers chasing coffee, children tugging on sleeves. And yet, as Lena melted into the crowd, no one stopped. No one looked twice. She was just another face. Another shadow swallowed by the city. But Sergeant Callum Rourke wasn't no one. He stood in the alley across from the bakery, motionless. Arms at his sides, the steam from his breath trailing into the cold like ghostly signals. His eyes followed Lena until she vanished behind a blur of red buses and gray coats. Only then did he let out a slow breath and turn back toward the barracks. His boots hit the pavement with purpose. By the time he reached the military compound, the fire burning in his chest hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown hotter, sharper. Callum had seen things during his time with the Special Air Service. Bombed villages, children orphaned by war, cruelty delivered with surgical precision, but somehow this felt worse. Because this time it had happened in broad daylight, in the heart of a city that promised to protect its own. Inside the locker room, the air smelled of gun oil, boot polish, and a trace of lavender soap. Sergeant Dax Winter was sitting on a bench, cleaning his dress saber with slow, practiced strokes. He looked up as Callum entered. "You're late," Dax said, not unkindly. "Wasn't rushing." Callum replied, his voice lower than usual. Dax studied him. "What happened?" Callum hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because the story didn't belong to him. Still, he told it. The girl, the bread, the firing, the shouting. The keys dropped into a grown man's palm by fingers that had every right to shake but didn't. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. When he was done, Dax sat quietly for a moment, then picked up his secure service phone and stood. "Who are you calling?" Callum asked, though he already knew. "People who don't look away." 3 rings later, a crisp female voice answered. "MOD Civil Enforcement. Captain Elise Morvan speaking." Dax stepped into full soldier mode, each word precise. "Ma'am, Sergeant Dax Winter, Wellington Barracks. I have a situation involving suspected child labor, verbal abuse, unlawful dismissal, civilian victim. Reliable military witness on scene." "Details?" she asked. 13-year-old female. "Unregistered labor. Fired after showing basic human decency to a uniformed soldier. Manager's name, Victor Mays. No permits. Potential pattern of exploitation. A pause. Source of report? Sergeant Callum Rourke, SASA's veteran. Confirmed eyes on. Another pause, longer this time. I know that name, she said. He doesn't call unless it matters. No ma'am, Dax said. He doesn't. You'll have a response within the hour, she replied. Full protocol. The line went dead. Callum sat down on the bench across from Dax and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The silence between them stretched, comfortable and weighty. You think this'll make a difference? He asked. Dax didn't look up from his sword. If it doesn't, we'll keep making more. The wheels had been set in motion. Callum had stood still for hours outside palaces and monuments. But today? Today was the day he moved, not for orders, not for pageantry, but for a girl with nothing but courage in her eyes and bread in her hand. And tomorrow? Tomorrow the bakery wouldn't be the same. Neither would London. By 3:15 p.m. The bakery was quiet, too quiet. The lunch rush had passed, leaving behind a few leftover scones and the low hum of an aging espresso machine. Victor Mays stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, counting the till like he was balancing the national debt. He moved with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had removed a problem before it spread. Then the door creaked open. 3 figures entered. They didn't be long. Captain Elise Morvan stepped in first, her mod enforcement uniform crisp, clean and cold as iron. Behind her came 2 Royal Marines in full dress blues, towering, broad-shouldered, and scanning the bakery like they'd rehearsed the formation. Conversations stopped mid-sip. Phones were lowered. Every head turned. Victor looked up and his smirk cracked. Mr. Victor Mays? Elise asked, her tone clipped and professional. He cleared his throat. Yeah, that's me. What's this about? Where? Conducting an investigation into a civilian welfare complaint related to this establishment. I'll need you to step away from the counter and remain where I can see you. Victor blinked, then laughed too loud, too forced. If this is about that girl, she quit, walked out. I didn't lay a hand on her or anything. One of the Marines, corporal, and stepped forward, opening a leather-bound portfolio. His voice was low, steady. By order of Mod Civil Enforcement and Royal Military Police, this premises is subject to immediate inspection under Youth Labor Protection Act 9C and Civil Employment Statute 27B. You are not under arrest. Yet, you are, however, under formal investigation. The air in the bakery shifted. The elderly woman at table 2 slowly set her teacup down. A teenage boy near the window pulled out his phone and started recording. No one spoke. Victor's voice rose. You can't just walk in here like it's a crime scene. Elise didn't flinch. Actually, we can. Now let's talk about your employee. A minor, no contract, no permits, no records. Working unsupervised and dismissed without protocol, he sputtered. She was helping out. That's not a crime. Employing a 13-year-old girl without legal documentation is not helping. Out, Elise snapped. It's illegal. Retaliating when she showed compassion to a military serviceman? That's abuse of power. We take that very seriously. Victor backed up against the espresso machine like it might protect him. She didn't tell me she was underage. Doesn't matter, said Corporal Han, flipping a form. Due diligence is your responsibility, not hers. The 2nd Marine, Lance Corporal Reese, was already at the employee files, snapping photos, flipping folders. No permits, no age verification, and several handwritten wage slips with missing hours. Victor's face drained of color. She never complained. Elise stared him down. Until now. Then the door opened again. A woman from Odd Welfare entered, holding a folder and leading a small familiar figure behind her. Lena. Clean clothes, brushed hair. Holding herself a little taller, Victor's mouth dropped open. What is she doing here? She's here to collect her final wages, the welfare officer said evenly, and to sign paperwork confirming the end of your illegal employment arrangement. I don't owe her anything, Victor snapped. She abandoned her job. No, Elise said sharply. You fired her, verbally, in front of a military witness. That means she's owed back wages and compensatory damages. Corporal Ain rattled off a number. It wasn't small. Victor nearly choked. I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to make arrangements, Elise replied coolly, or face prosecution. Lena stepped forward, her voice quiet, clear-cut through the room. I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to help. The silence that followed was deafening. You didn't cause the trouble, Elise said, lowering her voice. You revealed it. The investigation stretched for another hour. The Marines moved methodically, photographing every corner of the bakery, flipping through payroll logs, and collecting statements from customers who hadn't left, those who couldn't. Because something inside them said they were witnessing justice finally knocking. Victor Mays had gone silent, slumped in the corner like a deflated balloon, watching his little empire unravel one clipboard at a time. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the bluster. All that remained was a man staring into the wreckage of his own arrogance. Outside, the gray London sky had deepened. Lamps flickered on along the streets. Behind the counter where Lena once stood, the espresso machine gave one final hiss before shutting off, as if even it was tired of the noise. Captain Elise Morvan issued the order, temporary closure. A bright yellow notice went up in the window. Mod investigation. Do not tamper, and just like that, the shop was no longer his. Victor stood behind the locked glass, looking out, while Lena sat calmly in the back seat of the MOD car parked at the curb. She clutched a folder filled with her new life official employment protection documents, education support referrals, and a stipend to get her on her feet. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She looked once, just once, at the place that had been her cage, and then looked away because she wasn't going back. And somewhere across the street, in full ceremonial uniform, Sergeant Callum Rourke took his place once again beside the palace. Gate. Same stillness, same uniform. But the crowd wasn't looking at the red coat anymore. They were looking at the man inside it. Word had spread. That's the one, a teenage girl whispered, nudging her friend. The soldier from the bakery. Her friend nodded. My mom said he stood up for that kid, that he saw what nobody else did. An older gentleman passed by, paused, and removed his cap in a slow, deliberate gesture. Others followed suit. Dozens of strangers, heads bare in the cold London air, standing in silence not for tradition, but for the truth. Rourke didn't move. Couldn't, by regulation. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might have noticed a slight shift in his stance, a softening around the eyes, a presence that didn't demand respect, but quietly earned it. And just beyond the gates, Lena stood in the crowd. She didn't wave for attention, didn't smile for cameras. She simply raised her hand, small, steady, and gave the briefest of acknowledgments. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just real. She had been invisible once. Now she wasn't, and he had seen to that. Later, when someone asked Rourke why he'd gotten involved, he gave the same answer he always did. I did my job. But the truth was, his job had never been just about standing still. It was about seeing what others missed, about protecting what mattered, even when no one asked him to. Sometimes, a battle doesn't come with gunfire or glory. Sometimes, it comes with paperwork, phone calls, and the quiet decision not to walk away when you see something wrong. And that day, a little girl handed a soldier a loaf of bread, and a soldier gave her back the one thing no one else had offered: a future. This story wasn't just about uniforms or rules. It was about seeing people when others choose to look away. If you've ever witnessed a small act of kindness that changed everything, or stood up when no one else did, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in that bakery? Have you ever been Lena or Callum? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes your voice is exactly what someone else needs to hear. Kindness starts conversations, and your words might be the spark that inspires someone else to speak up, to act, to care.